Well, that was a very generous introduction. Thank you. So how cool is it that you got an invite and you're sitting here in an IAMPHENOM conference? So if you self-select, that means you're phenomenal, right? It's kind of cool, right? And last week I was working on my presentation and I had the IAMPHENOM.com site up. I was taking a look at everything. And my daughter pops her head up right behind me and says, "Hey, Pops, what you working on?" And I said, "Hey, I'm working on my presentation. I was asked to speak at this IAMPHENOM event." She's like, "Why?" I was like, "What do you mean, why?" I was like, "I think I'm phenomenal." And she's like, "Well, I hope you don't disappoint them." With that said, I'm Dave, and I design categories for a living. And I'm hoping after the next 25 minutes or so, you're going to all understand that you're category designers too. Because you're not just at an IAMPHENOM event. You're at a category event, a movement. You're here to change the way the world works. We're going to talk about some of the disciplines that these mega category kings and these upstarts use to create these categories, make the world work a completely different way, and apply that not only to your businesses, but hopefully your day jobs. So let's get started. Every product, company, and service we love exists because a legendary entrepreneur, pirate, dreamer, innovator solved an unsolvable problem and created a product, company, and category at the same time. Let me give you an example. Back in the 1920s, this guy, Clarence Birdseye, was observing local fishermen in northern Canada catching fish, pulling them out of the ice, and flash freezing them right on the ground. Why were they doing that? Because they kept that fish frozen until they decided they wanted to eat it, and the day they wanted fresh fish, they'd thaw the fish out, cook it, and eat it, and it would be fresh as the day they caught it. And Clarence was a problem solver. He was trying to solve a problem on how to get fresh vegetables out to the masses. Because in the 1920s, if you wanted fresh vegetables and didn't live near a market or a farm or anywhere near harvest season, you got your vegetables in a can. And so Clarence figured out a way, hey, I'm going to take that flash freezing technology and apply it to food and vegetables, and he did, and he was successful. But that was just the beginning of his journey. He then had to figure out how to move his product. And he had to convince the railroads and the trucking industry to install refrigerated frozen units in the vehicle so he could move his product. And then all the way out to the edge, he had to convince supermarkets and markets to install refrigerated and frozen units to create more real estate to sell what today is known as frozen foods. This category didn't exist before Clarence made that observation about flash freezing fish. And it turned into a multi-billion-dollar category, still $50 billion, trillions of dollars in long-term economic value over the ages. He changed the way the world works. Another example of a category designer, Bianca Valente, very close friend of Play Biggers. Bianca is a big wave surfer, a woman who surfs the biggest waves in the world. But here's the problem. Bianca and her friend, her tribe of big wave surfers, weren't allowed on the lineups with the men. This is 2018. If you met Bianca, you would know how much bullshit that was to her and her crew. So she decided to solve that problem. She didn't decide to do it by bullying her way into the lineup because that wouldn't work. She also respected everybody else in the lineup. She solved the problem by creating a new economic structure for the surf industry who needed more sponsors and more revenue from the surf events. And by doing that, she pulled her and her tribe out on these waves, and now they're surfing the world's biggest waves and competing with men and outdoing the men in some cases. This is Bianca at Mavericks, and if you know Mavericks or seen any of the movies about it, it takes a real courageous individual, man or woman, to go paddle out into that. So, as we said, there's a bunch of other category designers at work trying to figure out a different way to make the world work. You're here at the IAMPHENOM event. Things are going to need to change, though, and we're going to talk about how we can look at the scope of category design and problem solving to start to make these big shifts that we've been hearing about, that Rudy talked about, that Leanna just talked about. Because things need to change in order for things to grow and progress. And the big question is, what kind of problems are we going to be solving in the future to change the way the talent world works? So growing up, I always had an interest in how people solve problems. As Ed mentioned, I think it started from growing up on an Iowa farm. Anybody spend any time or grow up on a farm? Anybody? Okay. Is this true? Is it fair to say a farm is a large collection of unsolvable problems? It never ends, right? You wake up in the morning, the cows are out, you put the cows in, the fence is down. It never, ever ends. And this is the farm that I grew up on. And that's my grandpa's tractor. Talking about labor and workforce, labor on a farm are kids like me, and as soon as you're tall enough to drive that tractor, you're in the workforce. And actually, when I first moved to California in 1996, people were talking about hard work. And they were telling me how hard it was to sit in front of your computer and go home late at night. And I just looked around for calluses on people's hands, or like if you work on a farm, you're lucky to keep all your limbs. That's hard work, right? So anyway, I'm digressing a little bit. I remember one trip I took back to Iowa with my daughter, and I was telling her I kind of did that dad story, when I grew up. We didn't have Lyft and Uber and other fancy ways to get around town. We had to drive these tractors. And I elaborated, and I was kind of joking. And what do you know she did? She jumped on that tractor. And then she challenged me whether or not I could drive it or not. And I forgot how. So anyway, I digress a bit. I'll come back to some more category design. In a county just to the left of Lucas County, Iowa, there was a farmer named Gary Vermeer in Pella, Iowa. Gary Vermeer was an innovator. He was famous by saying, never underestimate the ingenuity of a lazy farmer. And he was not a lazy farmer by any means, but he did solve some problems that changed the way the world works. And one story in particular, Gary was approached by a friend who was in the cattle industry, and he said he's going to get out of the cattle business. And Gary said, why? He said, it's too hard. Can't feed the cattle. It's too labor intensive, too much work to produce all the bales of hay and all the hay that the cattle need. And if you know, just to give you a little context, and I grew up on a hay farm, if you bale hay back not that long ago when I was growing up, they came out in these little square bales. They weigh 40 to 60 pounds. If you would mow down a couple hundred acres, you had 1,000 of those sitting around in the field, and then you had to grab a crew of about 20 of your favorite friends with a trailer, throw those 60-pound bales up on the trailer, take it to a barn, stack it as high as you could reach 2 to 3 times a year. So Gary said that problem needs to be solved, and he created something called a one-person hay system, now called a round baler. And he changed the way farms work around the world. So this fascination with problem solving led me and my partners down a very long journey to uncover how categories are created by solving problems. And we did write a book. We looked at the data between all VC-backed companies in the United States since 2000. We interviewed hundreds of CEOs and founders. And we wanted to understand the patterns and the foundation and the framework that these companies and these founders and these entrepreneurs took to build these wonderful categories that we all enjoy. And we studied Apple and Google and Microsoft and Uber and Salesforce, all the known companies. And then turns out, in chapter 10 of the book, we decided to throw in an additional thinking around how you could apply the concepts and discipline of category design to your career. And it might be one of the more popular chapters of the book. He was joking earlier, Neil was joking about the book that didn't have any words in it was the most popular chapter. This one might be the most popular chapter, and it was at the end of the book. And I'm going to share some of those insights with you as we go through the rest of the session. So in a nutshell, category is a simple definition. It's a class or division of people or things having a particularly shared characteristics, and that characteristic is a problem to be solved. And we're surrounded by them. An example that my partner Al likes to use a lot is when we're in California, I live in the San Francisco area, people travel out and they want to go to Tahoe in the winter. And they'll say, hey, I want to get to Tahoe safely, there and back. What kind of vehicle should I drive? And the answer is a sports utility vehicle. That's a category. We didn't say Ford, Chevrolet, BMW, or Jeep. We said sports utility vehicle. And these categories are the first proxy for the problem. This is where you go first, then go find the products. And we are surrounded by categories: ride sharing, smartphones, vacation rentals, virtualization. And then in HR, there's a whole host of new categories that have been rising over the last 10 years. Applicant tracking systems, HR management systems, talent relationship marketing systems, etc. And these categories shape the way people make decisions. And so I'm going to give you a few insights and share some of the insights we discovered from the book, and then I promise I'm going to try to land this down into some things that you might be able to take home with you in your day job or apply to your business. The first of all, the category design game is a winner-take-all game. There is no second place to Facebook. We talked about that earlier. Rudy mentioned that we're all employees of Facebook. That was kind of scary. And Zuckerberg actually had to face Congress and admit there is no second place to Facebook. Category kings take 76% of the economics, which means you have to bet right. If you're going to build your career on a technology platform or you're going to join a company, you got to think ahead about how far that company is going to make it and are they going to be the king of the category. 2, categories form a natural life cycle. There is a natural model that categories are developed. This one was inspired from some work that Paul Gorosky did on tracking the evolution of the automobile industry. And in this case, it was a 25-year vector. This model is built around a 6 to 10-year cycle. And categories all form the same way. We discovered this in our research. That blue line is the number of vendors coming into the space. Somebody discovers a new problem to solve. A bunch of venture capital money comes in. A bunch of companies are formed around solving that problem. Eventually, it consolidates, and then the market value of the category rises. We've all seen this. In HR tech, it wasn't that long ago, HR tech was kind of a buzzword, right? It wasn't, I can't even remember the first time I met Mahi and the crew, and I remember we were talking about going to this HR tech conference, like it was a niche thing that you had to go to. And today it's a huge conference full of thousands of companies. And this is the example of how that category curve exists, and we're all experiencing it right now. The third piece is categories are not static, and the long-term value of a category is immense. Do you remember we talk about all these kind of waves, these category waves or these job waves or these innovation waves that change the way we all work or that change the way businesses work? Anybody remember the onset of CRM? And this is a different CRM. This is customer relationship management. I know there's a CRM, I think it's candidate relationship management. CRM was not CRM when it first started. It was contact management. And it was led by two companies called Act and Goldmine, and they solved a problem moving business cards off the Rolodex into a database. And then the problem shifted. Not the technology, not the companies, but the problem shifted saying to Salesforce Automation saying, hey, while you have all this information collected, why don't you start to capture information, centralize, and start to automate the Salesforce process? And then that eventually evolved to CRM, where a guy named Tom Siebel said, hey, the problem isn't about automating the sales process. The problem is about centralizing all your customer data in one place. So the salespeople and the help desk people and the support people all see the same information about the customer. And thus, the CRM category emerged. And every time the problem shifted, the category got bigger. And a lot of jobs were created in CRM, still are. And then ultimately, if you met Tom Siebel or competed with Tom Siebel, which I did back in 1996, and he killed us, you wouldn't think anybody was going to dethrone that king. But along came Mark Benioff, created a new problem that said, on-premise software is impossible to implement. It's impossible. You would spend $25 million on a perpetual license of Siebel systems, and it would take you 4 years and an army of Accenture consultants to get the thing to work. And he created this new concept of application service provider that said you can consume software in a completely different way. No longer do you have to put it on-premise, you can get it from the cloud. And then every joke in the world came out about, the cloud and all the pot smoking references. And Mark Benioff was kind of a crazy guy for a long time until he was not crazy. And all of a sudden he led and created the cloud CRM category, which is now the cloud category. And it, again, changed the way the world works. And if you've been to San Francisco lately, there's a giant tower known as the Salesforce Tower. And it stands as a tall example of what happens with when a company comes in and solves a big enough problem. So think about these category curves, because as these curves shift, so do your job. And these curves exist both in the meta categories as well as the functional areas of your business. One of the most famous category curve misses was Netflix and Blockbuster. There was a point in time when I don't think any of us understood what was really going to happen. Right? Netflix was sending us DVDs and saying, I think their value proposition was no late fees. And now Netflix is what? It changes our lives. It's, it certainly is, I think, in the living room and in all of our lives. I always joke it's the world's best babysitter, right? And Blockbuster missed the curve. They were equally solving the same problem, but Blockbuster fell down the back end of that category, and Netflix just started entering that category and solving a completely different problem. And so, therefore, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say picking the right category curve is an existential decision. And Rudy talked about this, right? What was it, the headhunter market, 20 billion to 6 million in a lifetime, right? It didn't take that long. These categories come and go, and they drag the ecosystem with them, and the ecosystem's full of people and jobs and careers. And we'll get back to that in a moment, why that's relevant. Last thing is, categories are a result of how our brains work. And this is going to get a little kind of heavy and weird, but I remember I was speaking in front of a crew that brain surgeons, basically, that wanted to fix a problem about how stroke treatments were handled. And it turns out if you have a stroke, and unfortunately a lot of us have experienced that in our families, the minute you arrive at the hospital or treatment center, you have about 180 minutes expire between you being scanned and a stroke interventionist looking at your scan and helping you. 180 minutes. That's a giant problem because every minute 2 million brain cells die. And this company said, we're going to solve that problem. We're going to move that 180 minutes down to 5 minutes. And then I started thinking about it. I was like, wow, I'm going to stand here in front of a bunch of brain surgeons telling them how the brain works. And I had a moment, because I knew they knew I was from Iowa, and I knew they knew I didn't really know how the brain works. But they said all this stuff was true, so I'm going to feel really confident in sharing it with you. So with that said, companies and products don't really, they live in containers. They're kind of out in space, right? You don't really walk into a Netflix store. You don't experience Google. You put them in a container. And this container is a proxy for a category. When you want to get something done, you turn to the category, and inside that category are products and services. And categories are the way we all discover and kind of sort the world out around us. One of the greatest examples we use all the time, back to the grocery store, is the grocery store. Because if there's about 120 to 150,000 products inside of any given grocery store, could you imagine if they stocked all those products in alphabetical order? What would happen? You wouldn't get a thing done, right? Instead, you go solve the problem you're after. Baking goods, go get some baking goods. You want to spend $7 on a loaf of bread, go to the organic section, right? Categories are how we sort this world out. And our brains use categories to kind of cope with the overstimulation. Everything's kind of coming at us really hot and heavy. We're not quite sure, so we go back to these primal instincts of making decisions and bucketing our behavior and actions. And these biases take over, right? The anchoring bias is a tough one. It's really hard to follow Neil's presentation. You guys are comparing me to him right now. And that's tough, right? Because he came in first and decided, he set the tone for how today is going to be. And so these biases play a huge role in how we all make decisions. And at the end of the day, they're powerful, and they can convert things that look like this, which is the HR tech landscape. And I'm guessing you all have experienced this world. If you go to HR tech and walk down the trade show floor, it looks like this, and it feels like this. And there's a lot of noise coming from all these companies. But ultimately, these biases help you sort things into things that look like this: budgets, line items, priorities. So why does category design matter for a room full of HR professionals? Well, it may be fair to say human resources is a farm full of unsolvable problems, right? I think there's a lot of room to solve some problems and do things in a completely different way. And we are in the business of people, and people do incredibly unpredictable things that need and create problems that may be not solved by technologies, but in some cases can be. So Mahi asked, hey, can you drop this thing down and try to give some advice on how to apply some of these category principles to the day job or back to your businesses? I'm going to do my best and try not to disappoint you, to make my daughter proud. So the first one is be a problem solver. So I'm going to tell you a little story, and I'm not making this up because I saved the receipt. So at lunchtime, I had to go to my room because I had to make a phone call, and I ordered room service today, just now. And the room service guy showed up and opened the door, and it was Gene. I got his autograph. You think I'm joking. It says Gene right here. And he opened the door, and I'm like, oh, Gene. And he was like, whoa, what do you need? Cobb salad? And I said, 4 bottles of water, Gene. And he was looking at me like I had lost my mind. And I was like, well, we were just talking about you, and then Neil took your picture, and it was up, and he was thirsty, and he couldn't get room service. That guy, remember? And Gene was just like, oh my God. He sat everything down. He said, just sign this bill, sir. And he looked crazy, and I realized I lost my way with Gene. But he was a problem solver. And right before he left, I took one more shot. I said, hey, Gene, can I take your picture? And that's a weird thing to do. That's a weird thing to ask somebody when they come to your room, can I take your picture? And he said, no, I think I've had my picture taken enough today. All right, so here's one thing. Who's staying at the DoubleTree? All right, let's do this. If you happen to order room service and Gene shows up, could you do me a favor? Take your picture and put it on the Twitter feed for Phenom people, because I think that would be cool. We'll make Gene a superhero. Anyway, Gene's a problem solver. And one of the notions of category design is solving problems has power and value beyond skill sets and job recs, right? We all have skills, we all have talents, but if you're a problem solver, you can differentiate yourself. Some of the problems we talked about at the category level in the book drove huge economic impact and huge changes in the world. One of the first examples we talked about is making a guitar louder. And that was a problem solved by a guy named Les Paul, which created the electric guitar category, which changed the way music worked. I want to surf in cold water longer. Anybody been in Northern California and dip your toes into the ocean? It is icy cold, and it's a problem if you're a surfer. And so Jack O'Neill came up with a wetsuit and changed the way surfing industry worked. And he created this whole new category. And one of my favorite examples of a problem solved that changed the way the world worked and created brand new categories is the last one. Just because I'm tired doesn't mean I'm thirsty. Just because I'm tired doesn't mean I'm thirsty. Anybody want to take a guess? If you read the book, don't shout it out. Who solved this category? 5-hour energy. So this is an energy shot. It's empty because I drank it before I came on stage. And according to this bottle, I'm going to have energy for 4 hours and 30 minutes, so we can hang out after this event for quite a while. So energy shot, an alternative to coffee, an alternative to soft drinks, an alternative to big cans of Red Bull and things like that. Just because I'm tired doesn't mean I'm thirsty. Their first ad campaigns came out and attacked a problem called 2 p.m. You don't want to drink the stale coffee, and you don't want to drink a big can of yuck, and you don't want to drink a big glass of sugar water. Pretty amazing. So how do you know it's a new category? How's the energy shot a new category? If you ever go to a grocery store, it's never stocked next to coffee, and it's never stocked next to soft drinks. It's always at the point of sale or at a gas station that's next to the cigarettes, which makes the fact that I just drank one of these things kind of scary. But it's a new way of solving a problem, and it's a completely different approach to creating a new category. So ultimately, what are the unsolved problems that are going to change the way the talent world works? And these problems aren't going to solve themselves. And if you're a problem solver and you think this way, that's how movements happen, and we can get out of the old way and get into the new way. If you solve a problem perfectly, what category, career category are you in? I was working with one of my favorite people in the world. Her name's Mona Sabeh. She runs a high-power group in Silicon Valley, and it's a group of high-powered women executives in high tech. And we were having this session about what if your career and your CV and your resume wasn't a list of jobs you had and companies you worked for, or bullet points of skills that you've generated. What if it was a list of problems that you're good at solving? What would that do to the perception of your value? Who cares what skills you have? Who cares what companies you worked at? How about I'm excellent at solving these problems, and you should put me on that problem if you have one? And then we started to joke, what would that look like if you mapped it out over time? And so this is my career mapped out over time. I happen to be really good at solving a problem called getting stuff done. The technical term for this is getting shit done. But I told I was at an HR conference and I couldn't swear, so I'm going to say getting stuff done. And getting stuff done is a powerful problem to solve at almost any level. Started off in high school when I was getting chased around. I tell you, when you have a last name Peterson, you're a half Japanese kid growing up in southern Iowa, that's a problem because all the other Petersons are 6'4", blue-eyed and blonde-haired and a lot bigger than me. And so it was hard. So I got a lot of stuff done on the farm routes, and I worked my way up through the ranks, got into Silicon Valley, applied that same hard work ethics to working at startups, and I ended up being a category designer. But again, if you start to think about problem solving versus skill acquisition, it might change not only your perspective of what you're doing for a living, but also based off the kind of teams, problem solvers you're going to be eventually hiring. 3, what's your career potential if you take all the economics for the problems you solve? A couple months ago, I was at a conference called the Experience Management Conference with a big company called Qualtrics, and the conference is in Provo. And they had a 3-day session around experience management. One of the pillars of experience management is employee experience. And the problem you solve in employee experience is closing the experience gap. They talk about millennials want joy and happiness in their jobs, not necessarily pay and titles. And joy and happiness is a direct connection to experience. And what they did is they graduated a whole, I think, 2,000 to 3,000 HR professionals, I don't know if anybody was there, into their master class on experience management, and they gave them a new career curve. So again, new potential was created by attacking a problem in a completely different way. Language matters. Language matters a lot. Language can change the way people think and change the way that people act. A change in language can change the way people think and change the way people act. One of the master category creators that use languages to make us do stuff that we never did before is Starbucks. Starbucks convinced us that Free coffee wasn't good, but a cafe grande latte at $4.50, and it really is coffee, milk, and foam, maybe a design if the barista's talented, is worth $4.50. They changed the language to change the behavior of coffee drinkers, and there's a bigger story behind this, of course, but they are masters at using language to make us do different things. When they launched this Frappuccino, this unicorn Frappuccino, I could have killed them. I never took my daughter into Starbucks, but now she's loaded up on sugar, and it made it okay for us to bring our kids into the, you remember these things? They're awful. So, with that said, language matters. So I went to my notes that I took earlier. Remember the happy nun pile notes? The words, looking forward, eager joy, blessed, life. Those are happy nun pile words. Unfortunately, in business and technology in particular, we don't use language that would probably make the nuns very happy, right? And so I don't know if any of us ever wrote a job description that looked like this or ever went to a job board. I'm sure nobody in this room has ever been responsible for something like this, but I don't know. I've seen a lot of job descriptions. People, again, we're trying to advertise a happy place and a great position, and this is what we do to describe the opportunity. Megatech Corporation, headquartered in San Jose, California, is a leading developer and global supplier of innovative, high-speed, world-class infrastructure problem solutions to worldwide global 2,000 customers in all industries. Megatech is looking for a reliable, flexible, and powerful chief marketer. That's me. This leader must be highly skilled at evangelism, product marketing, public relations, analyst relations, lead generations, marketing systems, team building, and presentations. Writing skills a must. Must process in-depth understanding of applicable global communication standard software and hardware expertise in design, architecture, and development, standard-based open wireless technologies. Ideal candidate must be cage-free, GMO-free, high fructose, lactose intolerant, organic, and deliver high levels of performance and ROI. That's not the happy nun language. I like those videos I saw earlier. That made me cry. The dogs, wow. That's where the world needs to go. This world needs to go away. There should be a movement, and the only people I could think to recruit for this movement would be sitting here. You're at an IAMPHENOM conference, after all, to make some words foreboding. Everything in the world should pass the Iowa test. When my dad worried about me the most, I'd always send him stuff I was working on, because my job is to make very complex things simple. And I'd send it to my dad, and if he understood what I was talking about, he said, "Great, son, I'm proud of you." If he didn't, he said, "Son, we need some more help on the farm. It's time to get out of California and move back home." And so I think there should be some words, a movement to make some words foreboding. And I hope this doesn't insult anybody in here. But think about some of the words we use. These are common words. Applicant tracking. It feels like one of those movies with Harrison Ford running away from Tommy Lee Jones. We're tracking the applicant, It feels like something bad, that the applicant did something and we're going to track you now, right? It doesn't feel good. It doesn't make me feel happy at all. That's not a happy word. Interviews. I turn on CNN and the police are interviewing the suspects, right? Somebody was detained at the airport and they're being interviewed to find out what happened. Interview sounds like something that's happening to you. I don't want to be interviewed. I want to be, have a conversation, have a meetup, figure out how to get to know each other. And this last one might get me kicked off stage, so I purposely timed it towards the end of the presentation. Human resources. Who's going to be the first company that says, I know there's VP of people in here. I know that. But who's the first company that's going to say there's no more function called human resources? Because I think that's an old term for an old industry. We're people, right? I was imagining Justin after this week. This guy and his team worked so hard to get you all here and accommodate all your needs. I know how hard they worked. They never slept for the last month and a half, maybe 2 months. And I bet you Justin's not going to go home to his family and say, oh my gosh, this is a career week for me. I worked so hard. We had 200 phenoms in a room. We kicked so much butt. It was a wonderful day. Couldn't ask for any better. I love phenom people, and I love being a human resource. I just don't think that's how people talk. I'd rather be a phenom. So I don't know who in this room is going to do it, but it would be cool if there's no such thing as a human resource department. Instead, it's a people department or a talent department, anything but that. Your Frodos. Frodo, I get jokes about this. It's short for from to. It's not a hobbit going to Mount Doom. And Frodos are something that is a psychological fact that takes a long time. If you're going to move a world from the old to the new, it's going to take a while. It's a from and a to. An example I use a lot is Lyft. 10 years ago, if a college student that kind of looked stoned pulled up in a used Prius, with a mustache on their car and said, hey, why don't you and your family hop in and I'm going to give you a ride to the airport? You would call the police. We all grew up in the stranger danger era. That's not good. Might as well be in a white van. Ride sharing changed all of that. It's now okay for a total stranger to pick you up with no qualifications whatsoever and drive you around town. It took a while to move from the old world to the new world. And I think there's a lot of from-tos, a bunch of them, in the world of human resources, in the world of talent, and if solved, could change the way the world works, can move new categories, new category potential, new career paths. These from-tos, again, it's going to take a bunch of people like you to take the courage to make these changes. This last bit, and second to last, I promise. Number 6, position yourself or be positioned. There's 2 choices in business. One you can make, the other will be made. Position yourself or be positioned. I remember when I was a CMO back as an operator day, I thought I had made it. You know, I made it through the journey. I could be happy now. I'm a CMO. Was not that happy. It was a lot of work. And you get fired every 18 months. I don't know why you HR people fire CMOs every 18 months, but it seemed like that was the trend. But anyway, I do remember hearing all this noise about digital marketing. And I read this article about the new CMO is going to be a data scientist. And all others, it was that same dinosaur graphic, that's where I got it, saying all others will be extinct. And I started to feel kind of insecure, right? And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get positioned as the old school CMO, and I'm not going to be part of this new digital marketing regime. And someday I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be like that guy in The Hangover. I'm going to have Mike Tyson's tattoo on my face, and I didn't ask for it to be put there, right? And so you have to stay 2 steps ahead. Position yourself. Always be positioned as the problem solver on the next curve. And the last piece here is be different, not better. We heard this already. Remember the 5-hour energy? It didn't say it was a better solution to coffee. It was just different. Different provides choice. And we all have a choice. After IAMPHENOM, we could all go back to being the best HR professionals in the world, which is what's going to happen. Or we could start to think differently about solving problems and making this world of talent operate in a completely different way. It's a choice. And it requires a bunch of category designers to think like a category design to make these changes. Thank you.